This is the large bandsaw that we have here at the art shop at Bethel University. This is one of two bandsaws. We have a smaller one that's around the corner that I'll show you here in a few minutes. This is a great tool, and actually probably the most used tool down here in the shop. It's super easy to use, it's very friendly. Unlike a lot of the other tools that have the circular blade, this has a big band blade. It's a blade that actually is a big steel loop that goes around like this. You can see the teeth over here, you can see the teeth here. And the nice thing about the bandsaw blade, the way that this cuts is that it cuts, the action is going down, where the other blades, the rotation is either going towards you or away from you. So this has very little pull on the material as you're cutting. It's easier to get a straight cut. It's a little quieter, which frankly I kind of like. And it doesn't maybe pull on the material, or you don't have to, it doesn't have the sort of the power fighting the material because it's cutting a very narrow band. You know, the circular saws are cutting a fairly wide band, and this is fairly narrow. It's also a little simpler to use, so of really just a couple things to adjust. You can see right now that there's a lot of the blade exposed. This would be very dangerous to be using the tool in this situation where you have this, probably 8 inches of the blade exposed. So what you want to do is you want to lower the guard. This is the guard. You want to lower this, and so it's just a tiny bit above the wood that you're cutting, the thickness of the wood that you're cutting. I want to be ripping down just a piece of 2x4 here. So I'm going to put that here, and this is how you change the raise and lower the guide. I'll loosen this up, push this down. And what I like to do is to just, put my finger underneath there. If I were to show you a little awkwardly, put my finger there so I got like a finger width, and then I tighten this. As you can see, there's a little bit of space there, but not very much. You don't want it tight because you don't want it to drag on there. And there's really almost no way that I could get my finger in there now to cut myself. So it's quite safe. The other thing to be concerned about, you can use this one. This is a tool where it would be perfectly safe to just kind of freehand it if you wanted to just mark on here and cut it through here. But most of the time what people are doing is that they're using this fence also. This is a rip fence that's very similar to the previous rip fence I just showed you on the table saw. And so you can set this the way that you want to go. So you pull it over, and then when you get it where you want it, then you can just tighten the fence just like that. You don't need a lot of muscle on it. It's just like 2-finger tight. That's not going anywhere. That looks great. So I want to go ahead and run that through. This saw, the next band saw, and the sander that I'm going to show you actually have an emergency shut off, which is right here. It's a big red button, and these are all the same. And so if the saw is running, something happens that you don't like, and it will cut the power to the saw. There's also on this saw, this is the only one that has it. There's a foot pedal down here, which I'll show you at the end of the video, that I can step on that will stop the brake. It's called a brake. It works just like a brake on a car. And so that will kind of stop it so you don't have to stand here for 5 minutes while this thing kind of rotates down. So I push this in. But one of the things that's kind of sort of funny about this is you actually then have to sort of turn this and allow it to pop back out before you can restart the saw. Generally, I would say this is for emergencies, or I would not generally, I would say this is for emergencies. An emergency, sort of slap it with your hand to stop it. These are the 2 buttons that you want to use most of the time for on and on. So I'm going to get it started. So you can see it's not a perfectly smooth cut, but it's a pretty good cut. It's not much rougher than like the table saw over there. As I was working on this, because again the action of the saw is to pull the blade down, I can sort of go through one side, walk, sort of hold it, come over here, pull it from the other side. That works great. That's perfectly acceptable. Even though I was cutting a shorter piece of wood, I can actually cut quite long material. Just run it all the way through, and we've designed it actually so that the table saw bench will kind of like work on the other side and sort of catch the material also. Typically, I would recommend that if you are cutting longer material, you just have somebody on the other side. Even for a lot of projects, it's just a little easier. If you're doing a lot of feeding of material, ripping stuff down, it's a little easier to just have somebody on the other side and kind of go all the way through. So a bit of a dilemma comes, and you say, well, if you're looking sharply, what you'll see is that this rip fence is actually interfering a little bit with, or not interfering, but I'm not really able to get this rip fence closer because this guard is in the way. And so if you want to be cutting material that's thinner than this, one of the things that you'll have to do is you'll have to raise this up a little bit so this fence can get quite close, and then raise it down again. So it's as to protect the blade, to cover the blade as much as possible. So if you're cutting, perhaps a linear space and form projects, you're cutting some little sticks, chances are you're going to have to raise this guard up in order to get this rip fence close enough to cut what you need to cut. As I mentioned when we were talking about the table saw over here, we do have these crosscut guides, and the crosscut guides work quite well in all the different tools. A little dusty. So you can put this in here and use this also to make some nice crosscuts for yourself. I'm not quite sure what I'd use these for, but it's easy to cut a lot of them. And so there you go. The major safety issues for this, for this saw is that you just want to keep your fingers well away from the blade. You want to be conscious, I think, with bandsaws and sanders in particular, that as you're cutting, because you do have to feed the material in like this, you want to be cautious that should you slip, that you're not going to put your fingers in there. And so that's why it's almost a better idea to be pulling from the other side. Push here until you get relatively close, and then come around this other side and be pulling from the other side, so that there's not that possibility to potentially slip and to get your finger into the blade. So. Okay, so I'm going to show you right now where the on-off switch is a little bit closer, and then also the breakdown here. Okay, so there's the on-off switch right there, and the emergency shut-off switch. Like I said, just really use these two down here, and only this one in emergencies. If you accidentally hit that, it's not a big deal. You just have to reset it. And then this is the breakdown here that will stop the blade. So if it's running, then you turn it off, then you can just stand on it, and it will stop the blade. So. Okay. Next, we're going to do the small bandsaw. This is the small bandsaw, which is quite similar in function and safety issues to the large one, which is just over behind me. Just to review some of those things briefly for you on this one, the rip fence moves back and forth. Again, with this one, you want to, having this much blade exposed is not good. So you want to have, if I was cutting, say this piece of material here, I would lower this until it was just a little bit above the material, and then use that to cut. So the rip fence works in much the same way. Again, just a little bit snug, and I'm going to go ahead and do this. If you were also cutting some material where you needed to cut it thinner, it's okay then to lift this up above the rip fence so you can get even closer. Maybe we'll do that just as a bit of a demo and cut some thin material here. This one does have a nice light on it, so when you turn it on, the light does come on. So again, emergency switch, which is back over here, the on-off green and red, which is right behind here. Another thing too, and I think it's important to maybe mention this now, I didn't turn on the vacuum when I was using the other big bandsaw, but when you're using these two bandsaws, the vacuum is super helpful keeping the dust down. So you can see I'm going to hold this up, hopefully you can see that. This is the one that I just cut with the smaller bandsaw. The smaller bandsaw has a finer blade in it. If you notice the teeth right here, it's going to stop. There it stopped. The teeth here are actually quite small relative to the very large teeth over there. So that's the difference. This is quite smooth. This is the one that I did on the big bandsaw, which is a lot rougher. So you know, you can go ahead and cut a lot of material on this. It basically works the same. A little bit slower. You know, you sacrifice some speed with, you know, it cuts a little slower when you have finer teeth, but you know, it kind of depends on what you're after with the different projects. So. I'm going to grab a piece of cardboard. Well, actually, I have a piece of wood over here that I can use to show you, you know, another thing or two. You can see. To take this off, because what I'm going to do is show you how to use this without the fence. So you can take this off just by lifting it up, sliding the fence. Got to kind of jiggle it through and get it through there. So. You can also use the bandsaws to freehand cut, which means that you know, you can cut kind of curved shapes. So I'll demonstrate that. I don't know that I necessarily have to talk about that a lot. I think if I just show you, you'll get the idea pretty quickly. So again, we're just going to lower the blades so that we have very little exposed, and just do some freehand cutting with that right here. So you can see it's possible to do some, you know, some fairly tight curves like this. You know, so this is another way to use the tool that works quite well. You can also freehand with the big bandsaw, but the blade on the big bandsaw is very wide, and so it's quite difficult to get any sort of curves. You really can't get any kind of meaningful curve on that one. But this one, you could do a lot of curves, and you know, even if you wanted to, like, maybe round that off, I'll show you how to do that real quick. So you can see you can get some really great curves going and not be bound by making everything straight and square like we do in America. So this is a tool that you can use to make other kind of curves and other kind of shapes for yourself. So, again, the safety with this is keeping your fingers well away from the blade right here, and we also have the emergency stop here, but a relatively safe tool. So. Okay, next we're going to look at, we just have a few tools left. We're going to look at the big belt sander. We have just a couple tools left. This is the belt sander and the disc sander. These work great for cleaning up material, for cutting raw edges, just generally kind of shaping things. It's a pretty straightforward tool, not a complicated one, with just a few safety issues to contend with. The way that this tool works, they are both hooked into the same motor so that when you turn it on, you can see that this one spins and this one revolves. This one has a belt on it that's a little bit finer than this one. The disc is a little bit coarser, but the way that this works, if you were, you know, this is our piece of wood from earlier. You know, maybe you said, "Well, I really want to, you know, have some rounded edges on this." You would come up and you would start to you know, work in this way. So the safety issues with this are that you always want to make sure that you have the material flat on what you are sanding right here. You don't want to be having it up like this. But other than that, it's not a complex tool. The reason that you would sand something down, you know, perhaps you had, you know, maybe I'll start with this one. You know, perhaps you had a piece of wood like this and you wanted to round some things off, or perhaps you cut this with a table saw and there was a lot of saw cutting there, or you cut it with a bandsaw, there was a lot of tooth marks right there, and you wanted to clean that up. So I'll show you that one first. see right there, it's quite smooth. The grain is sort of going this way, but it's actually very smooth, and gets rid of all the tooth marks really well. As I was sanding here, I'm not pushing against this very hard, just pushing a little bit and keeping my fingers well away from the action right here. Just back and forth like this. That works really great. I would say that probably the most important safety feature of both of this side and this side over here is keeping your fingers away from this right here. If you are, and it can be tempting to get right in there, or it's tempting to use smaller bits of wood. I wouldn't use anything, sort of a lot smaller than like that. You want to be able to make sure that you can have your fingers well away from it, well away from the business action of what's happening with the sandpaper. So, it's like 4x6 would be about the smallest of anything that you'd ever want to sand on this, because you want to be able to show you, first of all, you have good grip on it, and also that your fingers are well away from what's happening here. The other thing that you can do with the bandsaw is actually a little bit of shaping. And so I'm going to grab that piece of, grab this that I had cut earlier, and let's maybe say, wow, I got this, but I actually want to shape this. I want to make that a little bit rounder. So you can see I'm able to round that really nicely, just with very little action. I'm not pushing very much. It's not a muscular activity that we're doing here, just allowing the tool to do the work. And this, like I said, is a finer cut on it than this one. This is actually much coarser over here, and I'll show you the difference between those two. This, so this one right here, another quality about this right here is that you can actually set it at a bit of an angle. If you remember this piece of, that I cut over here in the table saw a few minutes ago, where I cut this angle in there because I'm going to make a painting on the surface. Maybe you say, well, I've got some teeth marks on here, some cut marks. I want to get rid of that. What you can do is actually set this, loosen this up, set that angle so it matches. Getting rid of all that stuff. It's working great. Put this back when you're done. The other quality about this disc sander over here is that when you're using this disc sander, you only want to be using from the center of the tool this way, like this part of the pad. You don't want to be using this part back here because of the rotation of the tool. If you're cutting over here, because the tool sends this way, if you're cutting, the action is sort of pulling the wood down against this. If you're doing it over here, it's going to lift it up, and I'll show you what happens when you do that. But this, like I said, it's a little coarser, so you can actually do some more heavier shaping on this side. So a pretty straightforward tool. Keep your fingers away from the sanding, of course, the sanding papers. On the disc side, only work over here. And on this one, just be careful that you're not in a position where you can get your fingers in there. So. Okay, two more tools. This tool is our drill press. If you have ever used a cordless drill, handheld drill, this is essentially the same tool. It's just a larger shop version with things that are a lot more stable. We actually like it a little better here than some of the smaller hand tools because things are held, they're solid, they're more stable. It's easier to get a nicer drill, a hole where you need it, and so on. So it's a preferable tool. It does take a little bit to understand how to use. In terms of the bits that you need for the drill press, I would say let's stick with the standard looking, this is a very large version, but a standard looking drill bits like this. There are plenty of other drill bits that you can use for cutting wood. There's spade bits and like paddle bits and all kinds of things. If you want to use one of those, a special application, I think for the sake of simplicity, we're going to stick with these kind of bits for this demo, but absolutely you can use those other kind of bits. Just come and see me, come and see the studio associate, and we'll get you set up and make sure that we can use that correctly. So the bit, essentially, this drill bit, we have a whole set of these drill bits. You saw me reach over here and grab this. We have a whole set of drill bits over here. It's a complete set. You're welcome to use these. We keep them here. It's a pretty solid set. Over under the table saw, there's a set of drawers that also have just scads of bits over there, so you can use those too. Grab any of those that kind of serve your purposes. To put a bit into the chuck, which is what this thing is called right here, there are two parts to the chuck, and this is something that it's actually a little difficult to show you exactly, by the camera, but there's two parts to the chuck. There's a part down here, there's a part up here. They move independently, and so to put a bit in, what you do is you kind of hold one and you turn the other, and this will sort of open and close. There's like three finger jaws down there that kind of open and close like that. So you open it until it fits in, just barely, and then hold the top and just snug the bottom part right here. And you don't have to get, like if you're a big guy like me or a football player or something, just a little snug is all you need. It's very easy to get that thing in there so tight that you can't get the bit out again. But it's very, just get in there snug, that's all you need, and then you're good to go. For this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a mark in this 2x4 right here. I'm going to say, like, this is where I want my hole to be. So I've got this project, and this is where I need that size hole to be. The nice thing about the vise arrangement that we have on here is that it holds things super steady. It's really great in that way. So what you do is you can put the material in, clamp it down, and then you can push this down and you can see, you can probably see that I missed it a little bit. So there's a set of, there's a little handle over here, there's a little handle over here, and I can just move this thing all over the place. I can move it, sort of back and forth this way. I can move it back and forth this way, like this. So, I think, there we go. I got it right there. And so if you want, you can there's a couple of set screws on there. Those are not super important for holes this size, but then I'm good to go. So I can go ahead, this is in. There's not really anything that can go wrong at this point. When you are working with a tool like this, you want to be a little bit careful because it's a rotational tool. You want to be a little bit careful that you don't maybe have, like if you're wearing a hoodie with a string on it, that you're not bending over, that string could get kind of wrapped up in there. That would be bad. And so just make sure that you're well away from it. There you go. Pretty straightforward. So let's see what that thing looks like. Wow, there you go, right on through. Perfect. You don't have to worry about hitting, some of the stuff down here when you're cutting. Just don't push down super hard, and that just go until the tool stops and you'll be fine. And so the nice thing about having this little vise on here is that you can sort of, if you want, is that you can take advantage of the fact, get those all in a nice row. I don't know why you'd ever need to do that, but if you did, that'd be super easy to get all these perfectly lined up. So this is very nice, and whenever possible, I would say use this. And this opens up to a good 6-7 inches, which frankly is like most of the things that we're drilling holes into. Little piece of metal, little piece of wood, whatever, clamp it in there and you're good to go. Sometimes, however, you might have a larger piece of wood that you need to drill into. And you have to remove this vise arrangement, so that we keep a clamp on here. I'm guessing this thing probably weighs 20 pounds. And so we want to, if you're having difficulty with that, you can see the studio associate, you can see me. We can give you a hand with taking this off. And if you do that, however, chances are pretty good that you are going to have to raise this bed up because of, even if you go all the way down with this, you can see it's not, you're short. The tool only goes down so far. So to raise this up, there's a little handle back here. You got to loosen this up just a little bit. Then there's a handle here, and you have to help it a little bit. Kind of raise it. Here we go. Like that. Gets a little sticky from time to time. And then tighten this down again. And you're good to go. And so I can make another mark. Let's say I want a hole here. I want a hole here. So there you go. That works quite well. You don't need a ton of force to just hold this piece of wood because the holes that you're cutting here are quite small. If, however, you had like a shorter piece of steel and you were drilling holes into the shorter piece of steel, that will tend to grab a little bit more. And so any sort of metal that you're cutting, let's not even say probably, you definitely want to be clamping it down. So if you had like a sheet of metal, put the sheet down and then use this clamp to clamp it to this, or else put the vise back and put it back in the vise. So, one of the things that I would like to mention again is that this is a rotational tool, so you want to be a little bit careful about that. I should have mentioned this back when we were talking about the sander over there, and that is that's a rotational tool. So for both of these tools, you want to be really cautious. If you have long hair, for example, like make sure to get your hair up into a ponytail in a way so it doesn't get down here and get tangled in it. It can happen super easy. Or even, like I mentioned, a hoodie with the cord in it. I've seen students do that where they bend over, or they're using some kind of tool and the string from the hoodie just zips and it's gone. Just kind of sucked right through and kind of wrapped around the tool. So that's not so good. Or even like a corner of a shirt, like this one is not liable to like sort of drift out and sort of grab the tool. But if you had, like a sweater maybe that had like a lot of sort of loose thread on it, you would want to be careful to not do that. So be a little bit cautious about getting into the material, getting the clothing, the potential for the clothing to get sort of drawn into the material that you're working with. So. The final set of tools that we're going to talk about are the pneumatic nailers. And so we're going to go into the next room and take a look at those. The final set of tools that we want to show you down here in the Bethel Art Department are the pneumatic nailers. That's pneumatic as in P-N-E-U, matic, pneumatic meaning air nailers. So they work by air pressure. Super common tools out there in the world. I am old enough. My father was a builder, and when I was young, even like a little bit younger than you, not too much, I used to pound nails by hand. So I'm actually quite good at pounding nails by hand. But I gotta tell you, in the world of construction, as soon as these air nailers came along, everybody started using them. And there's a reason for that, because air nailers are faster, they do a better job on virtually everything, and also the nails have a little adhesive in them. So not only do people tend to put in more nailers, they save tons and tons of labor, you get a better job, not only sort of working, but also a better job when you're done. So these are super handy to use. Absolutely do not be afraid of them. The price of these things just seems to be dropping constantly. So they're super affordable. You don't have to have a big compressor. We actually have a giant compressor in the other room that you can't even hear. Just a little compressor like this that you can get, for 150 bucks. Works all of these very nicely. So there are 3 different kinds of nailers that we have here that we use. And they're all basically the same strategy. We have an air hose that hooks into the back. They're either shooting a staple like this, which is sort of a variation on just like a regular staple. So it's a piece of metal that goes up, over, and down like this. It's either staple, a little nail like this, just what would be called a brad, a little nail, or even a little tiny nail like this, which is about half the thickness of this one right here. This is called a pin nail. And artists actually use all these a lot, but actually these pin nails work great for a lot of different projects. So the first one I'm going to show you is the stapler, which is this one right here. The nice thing about these tools is that they're pretty universal in a lot of ways. They all use the same air plug. So when it comes time to use these tools, first of all, we keep them in this cabinet just over here to the side. So you can sort of grab one of those. They're all labeled. All of these nails are over there too, so you can grab those at the same time. And to hook these up, this is a hose that we have. I like the green ones. The green hoses are a little bit thinner than maybe some of the other hoses around. But all of these air plugs, there are air plugs all the way around the studio, and what they look like are this coming out of the wall. Just that little plug where this collar slides back like that. So it's quite universal. And so I've plugged this hose into the wall over there. I have it right here, and I need to plug this tool into this hose. So the way that works is I pull this collar back. You are probably going to have to use 2 fingers like this, push the tool on, and then let go of the collar, and the collar will slide out. Okay? The first time you do this, the first 2 or 3 times you do this, what's going to happen is you're going to get it on, it's going to do that on you. It just does that, so don't worry about it. It's just a little fussy to get it on there, but once you figure it out, you have it for the rest of your life. So this tool is plugged in, it's good to go. The thing that we need to be a little bit conscious of is the size of the staple or nail that we're going to be using. For this one right here, I've got a chunk of wood. I've got a couple of different pieces of sheet material that I'm going to try. And so what I wanted was a staple that was relatively long. If you look on these tools, it will tell you the range of lengths of staples. In this one, it goes from 1.5 inches long to about 1.5 inches. And so staples that are quite short to quite long. All of those, so you can put them in here, mix and match even if you want. But all of those lengths of staples will work well in this tool. The tool is designed for all of those. To put the staples in, they're all a little bit different. They're all variations on the same. Essentially, you push this down, pull it out, and it opens up this. And so you put the staple in. You want to put the nail in the way that it's going to come out of the tool. So I'm just going to put in 1 clip. You can actually put in like 2 clips, fill up this whole thing. I just need a little bit. Snap it shut. You're good to go. Unlike all those horror movies or those Lethal Weapon movies, you cannot take this gun and just shoot it like this. It doesn't work. The way that these tools work is you have to depress the little guard on the nose and simultaneously pull the trigger. Both of those things have to occur. So you want to be careful that you don't do this accidentally. So don't, as you're sort of handling the tool, don't have your finger on the trigger till you're ready to use it. For this situation, I'm just going to, I've got this piece of plywood, I've got another piece of plywood. I'm just going to run a couple staples in here to show you how to do that. The difference between staples and nails like this, I could certainly use nails like this to put sheet goods on. Sheet goods are just like plywood or masonite or like pieces of wood that are flat or even cardboard. You know, things like that. If I wanted to staple that to pieces of wood, I would use a staple because a staple has that little thing across the top that holds the material really great. I could certainly do that as nails. It would have a little bit, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, it just doesn't hold quite as much. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on here. I'm going to depress this, so the nose is now depressed, and then, there you go. Oh, didn't happen. There we go. 1 staple right there. Wow. And I can just go ahead and put in a lot. Like even 2, like I really can't, if I sort of twist it, I can get it off of there, but that's on there quite secure. And so you can see why these are suddenly way faster, super easy to put on there. You can also use the stapler to put on thicker materials like this. Even just a couple of staples, again, becomes very rigid, very tough. The staples are great anytime you need a lot of strength. They are a little unsightly. You wouldn't use them on trim. You wouldn't use them on necessarily something that was visible. But man, they are really tough. And it also works on things like cardboard. If you wanted to nail cardboard in this or something sort of other sheet goods, or even like layers of burlap, stuff like that, you could nail, with a stapler because it does have that little bit across the top. secures it. So the stapler has a lot of terrific uses. Probably more common though, this one, out of all of them, the stapler probably gets the least amount of use. The one that gets more likely the most amount of use would be the nailer. Certainly you could use the nailer for, this kind of nailing. Maybe we'll just put a little thing together here. You can see, oh boy, I guess I just made a piece of religious art. Maybe we'll hold it like this. So you can see the little nails right there relative to the staples that are used here, which are a lot bigger and a little bit more unsightly. These work great, for projects like this. And I would say out of all the nailers, all the 3 different nailers that we have, this one gets used probably more than just about anything else. And again, it's super easy to put the nails in. The other nailer that, and by the way, to put the nails in the brad nailer, you take the nails, they have a head on them. These brad nails have a head on them. Again, you want to put the nails in the tool the way that they're going to come out, so the head goes up and the point goes down. You push these in here like this, slide them all the way forward, snap that shut, and you're good to go. And this takes nails from 3/4 of an inch up to 2 inches. So like 2 inches, that's like a really major nail like that. So this is really a good all-purpose tool here. If I was to recommend like an artist buying like one tool, one nailer, it would probably be this one right here, because you can just do a ton of stuff with this one. The other nailer that we have down here, excuse me, is the pin nailer. And the pin nailer is sort of a unique one because the nails that we're using are so thin. If I hold it up like this, they're about half the thickness of the previous nails that I was just using, and way less visible than the staples that we were playing around with earlier. So to load the pin nails into this gun, again, it's very similar to the last one where you slide the carriage open. I'm sorry, that went by a little fast. There's a little thing right here. You slide and you pull that in. The pin nails have a little arrow on them. You can see it right there. You want to point the arrow down. I'm going to use these, which are about 3/4 inches long. Just slide them in here. Slide this all the way forward. Snap that shut, and you're good to go. So you can see that. You can hardly see those nails at all. And so this works, really well. And these really disappear. And so, a lot of artists would use these, or there's a lot of situations where you want to use a pin nail because it just hides so completely. You don't get as much, holding power. You can see that you can move this a little bit, so you maybe have to put in a couple more of them, or more likely put adhesive behind them. But certainly this would work really well for a lot of applications. Think about the pin nailer, where the last one I was just showing you, it does have a tip on there you have to depress. The pin nailer does not have that. There's nothing on the tip, but it does have 2 triggers like this. And so you have to push this trigger down and then this one, and that will allow you to shoot the nails. And so this one you would want to be a little bit more careful with, especially if you're working with somebody else, that you don't actually accidentally like shoot the nail over. The nails are so small that they have very little inertia, so it's not like it's going to go ricocheting around the room, but still, a nail flying through the air, you don't want that. So you'd want to be careful. In terms of safety using these tools, the biggest danger is actually not from nails flying around, but the biggest danger is the wood itself. When you pine and fir, basically any kind of wood has grain in it, some harder areas, softer areas. So when you're putting a nail into the wood, you're never really sure that nail is going to go precisely where you want it to go. So if I was nailing this, I don't know if you noticed, when I was nailing this, I had my fingers well away from where it was going to go, because you have to expect that the nail might not go precisely where you are directing it. It hits a hard spot in the wood, it hits a nail, and it could easily sort of curve out the side. If you work on a construction site for a day or two using these nailers all the time, you'll see that happen a dozen times, where it's super common for the nail to just go. And so you would never hold the piece of material like this and shoot it like this, because it could easily sort of curve out and get you in the finger right there. So that's probably the bigger danger of anything. And of course, the other danger is flying material and eye protection. So eye protection, absolutely, you got to be wearing that so that you're doing this, and so things sort of flying around, you're not going to be getting the potential for things in your eye. You notice when I'm doing this, I'm always also wearing hearing protection. These are actually not very noisy relative to all these other tools that we've been using. These are relatively quieter, but the sort of the punch of the air, over time, can sort of degrade your hearing, especially if you're doing this a lot. As I mentioned, I grew up on construction sites, so I have a lot of exposure, so I'm always very careful about this. I would recommend, please, wearing hearing protection for this too, and save your ears so that you can listen to the things that you really want to listen to for the rest of your life. So I think that does it in terms of the safety equipment. The nailers, there's a little quiz to take now to look at, make sure that you pass all of this. And of course, when you show up, and we go through all these tools, there's a world of difference, isn't there, between watching somebody use a saw in person or a nailer in person and then doing it yourself. There's a difference between watching somebody do a demonstration and then doing it in person live yourself. And so as you show up, absolutely, we're going to be there, we're going to give you a hand, have some class time where we stake out and allow you to use these tools with instructors around so that you're familiar and you're comfortable with these. Because as I said at the top of the video, these are just capabilities. These are ways of thinking, visual thinking. One of the things that's sort of curious about these tools is the more you use them, the more your creative potentials and possibilities become expanded because you know how to do this. If you know how to use nailing equipment, suddenly there's a whole world of possibilities that are possible for you in those situations. So that's why we do this, to sort of expand that and to allow an expanded range of those kinds of visual ideas. So take the quiz, come to class. We're going to have a lot of fun playing around with these, and we'll see you later. Take care.